What's good, y'all, and welcome back to another edition of Mr. Fitzgerald's biology class. Today we're kind of getting a little bit deeper into genetics and talking about sex-linked traits. So before, we've already done some Punnett squares, we've done some incomplete dominance, some codominance, some multiple alleles with blood types, and we've kind of mixed it up and matched it up a lot through Punnett squares. Today we're going to take that a little bit further and show kind of traits that are linked to specific genes and how those are inherited. So let's kind of look at this a little bit deeper. Before we do, let's get a real refresher because it's been a minute. I'm looking at some of these words like homozygous and heterozygous. Remember, homozygous, that prefix homo means same. So these are things that have the same two alleles, like two capital letters or two lowercase letters. Or sometimes in like a codominant situation, it'll be the same capital letter. Or an incomplete dominant situation, it'll be like two red alleles versus a red and a white to make a pink. Okay? Heterozygous are those different alleles where you have mixing or blending or two different things. So this could be like a capital with a lowercase letter, or a codominant situation of having two different capital letters, like a capital B and a capital W, to get like a checkered color for a phenotype. Or you can have maybe a black and a white as a color alleles to blend together to make gray with heterozygous, or even with blood types, you can have a type A allele with a type O to make a heterozygous for type A, because O's are recessive and A's and B's are dominants. So all of that kind of comes in, and remember that an offspring gets one allele from each parent. So when we talk about inheritance and we're talking about these sex-linked traits, remember it's getting one thing from each parent, one from mom and one from dad, and that's going to become important because dad can only give certain alleles, mom can only give certain alleles, and the offspring are based on what they can give overall. So let's start talking about sex link. So before we get into that, a little head scratcher for you is, what is the probability of an offspring to be male, and how do you know? Okay, now some of you might have a conception of this. Some of you might have, brothers and sisters, and you're trying to work through your head and like seeing what the relationship is of those around you. But overall, I kind of want to know what your thinking is. Now, a lot of people go, well, there's two possibilities. There's male or female, so it's kind of like a coin flip. And if it's a coin flip, that would mean 50-50 probability. But let's kind of look at it from a Punnett square perspective. All right, so males have an X and a Y chromosome. What makes me a male is that I have an X and a Y chromosome at my 23rd pair of my sex chromosomes. Whereas a female would have two X chromosomes there. Now, why are they called X and Y? They don't look like X's or Y's. It's just the way that they've naturally determined male versus female overall. So, keeping that in mind, we got the law of segregation where alleles separate during meiosis. So when the male is making sperm cells, the father has a chance of giving an X chromosome to his offspring or a Y, because he has his genotype as XY for his sex chromosomes, his alleles, and those split up. All right, so he's got a probability of passing on an X or a Y. The mother only can pass on an X because that's what she has. All right, so she has the possibility of passing on either X allele. And then so when these two X's come together, we would have a female offspring here, we would have a female offspring here, we have a male offspring here, and a male offspring here. So it is a 50-50 chance, and that's because of the father. The father can only give either the X or the Y allele. So the father is the one, technically, the sperm cell that fertilizes the egg determines the sex of the child right away. Because mom can only provide an X, it's up to the father's DNA to tell it if it's going to be male or female. So out of the outcomes, you got 2 out of 4 would be female, 2 out of 4 would be male, so a 50-50 split overall. Now, the reason that we did this is to kind of show the setup and the breakdown of these alleles. Because now we're going to talk about things that are linked onto these, traits that are stuck on these X chromosomes or the Y chromosome, and how those will be inherited. So not only can you see the inheritance of something, you can also see the sex of the individual that would have it as well. All right, so overall, again, 50-50 probability for any type of male or female possibility, but that gets a little bit more complicated when we start linking genes to these. All right, so genes that are tied into the sex chromosomes are called sex-linked traits overall, and there's always more on the Y chromosome on the X chromosome than on the Y chromosome. And as you can see there, like the sizes, if you look at the X chromosomes, they're very long overall. They contain thousands and thousands of genes, whereas the Y chromosome is very small and doesn't really contain a lot of genetic information. There's a couple key genes on there that differentiates a male from a female overall in the sex department that activate during like an embryo's development, but most of the time this Y chromosome doesn't really do too much. There's way more genetic information on the X, so that's what's being used. All right, so a lot of these traits what we're going to talk about are X-linked traits, okay? Most common traits are X-linked. All right, so some popular ones that usually come up on questions. These are good to know because it helps you identify if it's sex-linked or not. Is hemophilia. They love to ask questions about the British royal family because they have a long lineage of hemophilia. The reason being is there wasn't a lot of genetic mixing. Cousins were being married, nephews and nieces and all this other stuff. So they keep the bloodline, quote, pure, and in doing so they have now more of a prevalence of blood clotting disorders. There's also baldness and some other things. Red and green color blindness, that's a very popular one that comes up because that also is an X-linked trait. Baldness or hair loss in general, that's another X-linked trait. That's why it's more common to see males bald than females, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And always the weird one, eye color for flies is actually on their sex chromosome. So what determines if they have white eyes or red eyes is actually what's on their sex chromosomes. I know it's a very strange concept for everybody to hear, but eye color is determined by their sex chromosomes. Now, is it more likely to inherit something that is X-linked if you're male or female? All right, let's look at this one a little bit. So any of these traits that we talked about, hemophilia, baldness, color blindness, all those, and eye color for flies, are X-linked. So it is more common in males. And the reason being for these traits to show in males is because they have a Y chromosome and one X. And that means this one X determines whatever they show. Okay, whatever they inherit from mom, typically, is what's going to be able to show. The female has two different X's to go by, so there is a possibility that a trait can be covered up, like baldness could be covered up, where a mother just carries the trait instead of actually showing the trait, because she has a gene that would be not for baldness, I guess normal hair on here. Or it's less common for women to be colorblind than men because they could have a bad gene here for maybe red-green color blindness, and the corresponding X chromosome has the good gene for normal eyesight, no color blindness. So that way it would show this one the dominant trait compared to that recessive trait. Males, on the other hand, if they inherit the gene for color blindness, let's say it's here, that's what they got. That's all they can work with. The Y can't cover that up. There's no gene for that on the Y chromosome. So ultimately, a lot of these characteristics are more common in males. Okay, so the easy way to tell if a question is sex-linked, if it affects males more frequently than females, it's probably sex-linked. One cool thing that came out of this as a big Buffalo Bills fan, a couple of years ago, they had one of the first color rush games. The NFL had the Buffalo Bills in all red and the New York Jets in all green. I have a cousin in Buffalo that is colorblind, and this is what he saw the entire game, this ugly beige color, because his eyes could not differentiate between red and green. So it kind of gets this beige hue. So he was only able to tell by looking maybe at the helmets a little bit, even though they were all white, if he got enough detail to be able to see what's going on there. And there's little accents of blue on the Bills uniforms there instead of the Jets uniforms. So that was the only way he was able to tell. There's a lot of backlash in the community because this game should not have been played in the way that it was. Anyway, so nice little fun aside there. So let's talk about color blindness and its inheritance here. So we have red-green color blindness is an X-linked recessive trait. If a mother who is a carrier reproduces with a father who is not colorblind, what is the probability of them having a colorblind offspring? And what is the sex of the offspring showing the trait? Okay. So key thing in here is this word carrier. We haven't really come across this yet, but somebody that carries something is somebody that has the gene but does not show it, which basically means they're heterozygous. Most of these things are recessive, meaning that they're going to be hidden traits. Okay, so these are things that can skip generations and you don't really see it. So if somebody is a carrier for that, that means that they have a good gene and a bad gene. All right, so let's look at this one over here. So if the mother is a carrier and is not colorblind, okay, so she's a carrier, okay, so she's got two X chromosomes, right, because female is two X's, but she's a carrier, okay, so that means she has one normal gene and one gene for colorblindness. And I'm going to use the letter N to signify colorblindness because C's, it's hard to tell capital or lowercase when I especially write them tagged onto these X's as little exponents because it's really hard to see the breakdown. Okay, so I'm going to use N's for normal color vision, I guess, and then colorblindness here. All right, the partner, the father of this child, is not colorblind. Okay, so that means that he is X and Y because he's a male. and he's not colorblind, so that means that he has the good gene, capital, no color blindness. All right. Now you just fill in the Punnett squares we've done before, kind of like with those incomplete dominance ones where you have the little exponents in there, and you just kind of go along and you just fill them all in. Put the Y in there. All right. So you have 50% chance of male or female, like always, right? Because there's going to be X's across the top in the way that I've set it up here, and Y's on the bottom. Okay, so these will be your males and your females. This individual has 2 good genes, so they're not going to be colorblind. This individual here is a carrier for color blindness, but would still show as not colorblind. This individual is not colorblind because they only have 1 gene, and that's for the non-colorblind one, and this individual over here would be colorblind. So out of the probability here, we have a 25% chance of a colorblind individual, okay, of a colorblind offspring. Let's see the offspring, all right? That offspring, though, has to be male, okay? With the genetics that it would be, it's a male overall. So is the sex of the offspring showing the trait? They would also be male. Okay, so 25% of chance of having a colorblind male offspring, 25% chance of having a non-colorblind male offspring, and a 50% chance of showing a non-colorblind female offspring overall. Even though this one's a carrier, but its phenotype is not colorblind. So these two would be virtually the same phenotype. These two would be different phenotypes as well as different genotypes here. Alrighty, so ultimately that brings us to some practice worksheet that you have. So make sure that you go ahead and complete that worksheet, work through both sides. Make sure you submit it. I'll allow the answers to be unlocked once I grade it. So I'll look through there quickly to make sure that you're kind of getting it. Allow you to check the answers yourself, so that way you can verify that you're doing it correctly, and ask more pertinent questions to me as well. Keep in mind that I do have tutoring available Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Message me if you want a link to that, and I can be available to you as well. That's all I have for today, and have a good one.